David Livingstone was a missionary to the continent of Africa. At a young age, David Livingstone had this desire to want to go to the continent of Africa and preach the gospel of Jesus Christ to those who had never heard it. As a young man, David Livingstone journeyed to the continent of Africa and traveled the length and breadth of that beautiful continent preaching the gospel of Jesus Christ in villages where witchcraft and all sorts of sorcery was in practice. David Livingstone brought the light of Jesus to those places. He was one of the first explorers who explored the continent of Africa to the point that his mapping of Africa still stands today. When the Queen of England heard about this British man who had gone to the continent of Africa and was doing all these exploration and was adding to the developments of the world map in those days, she said to her team, "You need to go bring this man back to England. We need to honor him for his services to the kingdom." Team goes to the continent of Africa searching for David Livingstone. It takes them a couple of weeks. And finally, when they find him, he was in a village, working there, ministering in that village. Before David Livingstone had the chance to respond to this invitation, he contracted malaria. And in 3 days, he died in that village. And this team who had come from Great Britain were confused. So they decided what we're going to do is we're going to take David Livingstone's body. They began to prepare his body to take it back on the journey to England. And a huge disagreement broke out in the village as they were preparing to take David Livingstone's body. The people in the village began to argue with the team, and they said, David Livingstone belongs in Africa. He lived for Africa, bled for Africa, and died in Africa. You need to bury him here. That's the honor you do for David Livingstone. Negotiations went back and forth for quite a long time. Finally, the team convinced the people in that village that it was in their best interest that they could take David Livingstone back to England and give him a state burial where he will be given the full honor due for all his exploits. Finally, the villagers agreed. As they were preparing to take the body, the head of the village suddenly burst out, come running with a knife in his hand, thrust it into the chest of David Livingstone, grabs his heart out of David Livingstone's body and looks at the team and he says to them, "You may take the body of David Livingstone, but his heart will forever remain in Africa," he said. So that day, they buried the heart of David Livingstone under a tree, and to this day, you can still go back to the continent of Africa and you will find the heart of David Livingstone buried there. Team takes the body back to England, full state honors in the burial. They lay him to rest, and on the tombstone of David Livingstone, they write, "Here lies David Livingstone, the great explorer and the missionary to Africa who took the light of the gospel to a dark world and brought hope to it." And then in the end of the tombstone, it was written, "Here lies his body, but his heart forever remains in Africa," it said. But the story doesn't end there, because David Livingstone had a brother called John Livingstone. David and John went to Sunday school together, and they both grew up with different aspirations. David Livingstone, from a young age, wanted to be a missionary to Africa. John Livingstone, on the other hand, he wanted to be a great businessman. He wanted to become well-known in England. He wanted to do good business. As they grew up, both of them achieved what they set out to do. David Livingstone, a missionary to Africa. John Livingstone became a reputable, successful businessman in England. He was instrumental in beginning several industries in England, and he had great respect among the business community. But one day, John Livingstone also died. And when John Livingstone was buried, on his tombstone were written these words. It said, "Here lies John Livingstone, the brother of the great missionary David Livingstone." Nothing else. It didn't talk about all his exploits. It didn't talk about all his business endeavors or the success that he achieved. Nothing. Even at the end of John Livingstone's life, the credit was still given to David Livingstone and what he did. And John Livingstone is forever identified as a brother of David Livingstone, who was a missionary.